just before we look into this, did I fucking see Ed Sheeran? His net worth is $200 million.
Sure, he's a major star, right?
But just, I mean, like,
I don't think I've ever heard a song by him.
Yeah, I can't.
But
I
also don't listen to music, so
I agree. I can't think of one.
The only reason I know him is that everybody was mad that he was like in Game of Thrones.
That's exactly what I was just thinking about. That's my only sort of like cultural reference to him. Yeah, is that he was in that Game of Thrones episode where he just sang, like they just like.
And they had to make him sing, like, what?
I thought it worked in the episode. I thought it was fine.
Sure,
Everybody was.
Sure.
I guess if you knew, I think that's the thing. If you knew him, it was like super recognizable. For me, I had to look him up because I had never seen him.
Yeah, I didn't
before.
recognize him at first. I think that was the season as well. It was the season where they started making some like really sort of questionable choices with the show and sort of
that was like when it all went downhill
in the wrong direction. But like specifically, this is kind of going off on a tangent here. We're supposed to be talking about the Heinz fucking Ed Sheeran commercial, but like, remember that was the season where they started sort of like they made direct references to like inside jokes from the subreddit.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, like the I think it was the Hound and how much he loves chicken. And Gendry like still rowing where we last saw him. Yeah. Really, really gross and disgusting.
Sicko shit, really. Sicko.
Firstly, I just this is something I've really been thinking about lately. I'm just thinking about $500 million to Ed Sheeran, like just a $500 million, $200 million, and like I said this before, like the reality is if somebody gave me a check for like $1 million tomorrow, like you couldn't even stop working. That's how fucked up like the economy is. It's just like it's not how it works. I mean, you could ostensibly like
I would stop working.
I mean, watch me. Watch how quickly I stop working.
Yeah. But like, give me a check for $1,000 and watch how quick I stop working.
If you had like like $8 million, like why would you ever be seen again? You would go just travel or sit on an island or sit in the woods and just like you've won. That's it. You've done it. But there must be something. And again, like I don't know anybody with this amount of money. And if I did, I would love to ask them. Just like what there must be something about that capital accumulation that just you don't stop. You don't stop.
Well, I mean, also if you're like famous, obviously there's another incentive to maintain prestige and whatever. Or I guess if you're like an artist or you fancy yourself one, and it's like, oh, now I suddenly have all the money, I can do whatever I want, creative freedom, blah blah blah.
Yeah, and even then, it's like, and that makes sense, right? Because like if you're an artist, but if you're an artist like Ed Sheeran, and I'm just using him, I like we said, I literally have no concept of one of his songs in my head, but like. You would just like go totally left, like don't make music that's popular anymore, like go follow your heart and like pivot to Zydeco or some shit, and like for the record, I have some controversial opinions about Zydeco that I won't share right now, but anyway, it's not for me.
It's all right. I like it.
It's not for me.
I don't even know what it is.
It's okay.
No. Let's get to
You ever been to Popeyes? Have you ever been to Popeyes Chicken?
Yeah, sure.
It's like the music they play in Popeyes Chicken.
Here, I'm
not listening to anything when I'm in Popeyes Chicken except my heart.
Every Zydeco song starts like this: 1, 2, 3. That's all, and there's a washboard. And that sounds fine.
Accordion. That sounds like all other music to me. That's fine.
No, with a washboard and accordion. Yeah,
just boring slop for your ears.
Which is, I mean, it's ironic, I suppose, because like as a bluegrass fan, one could criticize the genre by saying like, well, every song starts with and there's something to that. I won't look. Can you listen to
it works. That's
4 hours of bluegrass?
That's why they all start like that.
Yeah. Well. Okay.
Anyway,
okay. Show me the ketchup boy. Show me the ketchup boy.
Sheeran is I was looking it up, and this is the first commercial that comes up, which is weird because Heinz is one of those companies where it's it just feels like it's been around so long that I don't really feel like I've ever seen a commercial for Heinz or like advertising for Heinz. It's run so much on its own brand name. The only one else I could remember, which also popped up, is the that Super Bowl commercial where it's all like the hot dogs. it's like dogs dressed up as hot dogs running through a field, and then everybody's like dressed in ketchup bottles and shit. So anyway, we're gonna watch this Ed Sheeran Heinz commercial live reaction. We have not watched this before. Let's see.
No.
And if it sucks, that means that we did that whole Ed Sheeran intro for nothing.
What does it say? Based on a real DM.
It says based on a real DM from Ed Sheeran. So let's go ahead and watch this.
I've got an idea for a Heinz ketchup commercial. I was at a super posh restaurant. Super posh. The type of place that has chandeliers and paintings on the wall and way too many forks. I think classical music was playing, but maybe it was jazz. No, definitely classical. The hostess walks up to me and she says, Mr. Sheeran, is this your first time dining with us? And I say, yep. The waiter comes over. He's telling me about the specials. Super fancy vegetables, fancy sauces.
Fancy vegetables.
Sounds fancy. So, fast forward, and the food comes. The waiter goes on to tell me, we are proud to present this farm-to-table, blah, 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 posh and fancy, blah, blah,
so
blah.
So he puts Heinz on it. That's going to be the fucking punchline of this.
Yeah. The food looks good. I just thought there was something missing.
God,
give it a second. Give it a second, Shane. Give it a minute.
Anything that can complete me.
He's pulled out.
Oh, God. My pearls.
Stopped.
I must clutch my pearls tighter.
This is some British shit. He's putting...
It's like salad.
He's putting Heinz on a fucking cucumber.
Through his eyes.
These fucking sickos. All right, waiters having some sort of medical event.
So that's my idea. Do you want to do it?
And then
Heinz doesn't respond to a single one of the DMs I send them with advertising ideas.
If this is the bar for advertising, like how many hands did it have to get through to get to that point where it was just Shane, guess what? Your excellent media prowess got you way ahead of the game, and you called it. And I want to give credit where credit's due. You knew that he was going to put ketchup on like half of a carrot's ass or whatever that was, and like some zucchini, or they say courgettes in the UK. He was paid £300,000 for that.
Mm-hmm. Sure, that's a full day's work.
Now,
interestingly though, what's funny is that they're kind of even like leaning in as well with this commercial is sort of like the kind of like I guess like more sort of like working class kind of aesthetic or whatever that ketchup would have, right? Like you wouldn't use ketchup at a fancy restaurant. That would be a horrifying thing to do. Like that's sort of the image they're portraying for their brand, with the help of, again, like you said, a millionaire spokesman in a large company.
Listen, it was organic marketing. It was based on a real DM, Chris. I don't know if you caught that in the beginning. It was based on a real DM.
Yeah, that was really what got me offended. Like I said, they don't, I've been DMing them all sorts of things for years.
Well, Ed, you win. Hang on, what's this thing about before we move on? Why Ed Sheeran? Oh, okay. Never mind. I'm fucking blocked from this website. Never mind. He's got a $1,800 ketchup bottle. This is all fucked up, man. Nobody understands what ketchup is about. I'm the only person. Okay, let's get into the meat and potatoes, and then let me go on a unhinged rant, which will have to be submitted to the FBI. Okay, goodbye.
Now when I was a young boy, about the age of 5. My teachers taught me I could be the greatest man alive. They told me I could change the world, be whatever I wanted to be. There was no one in the world like me. Every one of us was so unique. I'd not be an average man. No sir, I'd be no average man. So I had those big dreams.
Welcome back, everyone, to Eat the Rich. This is a show about our political economy, late-stage capitalism, and the millionaires, billionaires, and multinational corporations hell-bent on staving off its death rattle. I'm Dwight, and today we have with us Shane.
Hello.
And we've got Chris.
I'm John Kerry, and I'm reporting for duty.
That's great. This is a very meaningful episode, I should say, to me.
for you, yeah.
Yeah, no, for me only. Hunts Gold bar ketchup, all these other ketchup off brands that are not Heinz are charlatans, sycophants, just posers. They just don't get it. Sir Kensington's, Del Monte, Annie's,
all taste the same.
French's.
They all taste the same. They taste like tomato paste.
No. Tomato paste is an entirely different thing.
No, it's the same thing. It's literally the same thing. It is.
I think they add some sugar. I think that's
that's sugar and like vinegar.
Well, we don't want to expose trade secrets on this program, please. Heinz ketchup to me is, you were talking about this earlier. Like, why do they need to advertise? Like, once you've established yourself as like this is the staple of ketchup, like this is the benchmark against which all other ketchups are measured. I am a huge fan of the product. I think that most of my left leg is probably made of Heinz 57, and that's just how I choose. That's how I choose to conduct my life, and I'm okay with that. And I've made no secrets that ketchup is a food group on its own, and it should be consumed in ocean quantities with any sort of just fried potatoes.
Bait. Okay, that's the only one though. That's the only thing it should be served with.
Canned herring. I can think of a few other things.
Cottage cheese, isn't that what didn't Nixon eat? Didn't Nixon eat ketchup on cottage cheese? I believe he did.
Guys, I'm already like so close to vomiting from some of the stuff that I'm gonna like present on. I don't need to add to that right now. Okay.
Apparently, it was cottage cheese with ketchup.
Just sicko. That should tell you everything you need to know about that person.
I'm not doing a bit. This is foul to me. Okay, I can't take it.
Please don't make our listeners vomit, Shane.
Well, there's probably people, honestly, with like bad gag reflexes that are like,
me. God damn it!
You imagine I wonder, did he mix it up together, or did he have like a little bit of the cottage cheese and a little bit of the ketchup in each bite? I wonder. I mean, that like clearly to me, in his case, exposes some deep like psychological wound.
That is a soul sickness.
That is really fucked up. Oh man. But yeah, breakfast sandwiches, bacon, egg, and cheese. Come on, forget about it. This is important. And so therefore, it's important for us to look into it. This is a large megalith of a company. So Shane, I suppose I will turn it over to you to discuss some of its origins so we can understand how we got to this point.
Of course, now it's Kraft Heinz, which is, I think, it's like the fourth or fifth largest food company in the world or something like that.
I think the fifth.
It's massive. But it originally started, at least the Heinz bit of it did, as just Heinz, and believe it or not, it was founded by a guy named Henry J. Heinz. So, Henry J. Heinz was born in 1844 in Birmingham, Pennsylvania. His father, Johann Heinrich Heinz, had immigrated to the United States in 1840 from Bavaria, and he had gotten married to one Anna Schmidt in 1843, and then they had their son Henry. At some point, the young Henry attended Duff's Mercantile College in Pittsburgh. He worked as a bookkeeper at his father's brickyard in Sharpsburg, Pennsylvania, which was sort of an outlying town of Pittsburgh. I had to look this up because
it's kind of a nice town, I think.
Is it? That's what I figured, that it's like an outlying suburb or whatever, because I a lot of the early history stuff, and I was pulling this from a couple of places, but including their own corporate website history. Some of the names are like used interchangeably, and so I was trying to figure it out, but it's like upriver from Pittsburgh, but not very far. So I guess now it's probably just part of the city, but somebody knows. Somebody from Pittsburgh
knows.
Somebody
DM Heinz their opinions of Sharpsburg, Pennsylvania.
But anyway, at the age of 25, Henry Heinz started a food packing company in his parents' basement with this friend of his, L. Clarence Noble, and this was the Heinz, Noble and Company. Their first product was bottled horseradish, which Heinz had gotten from his mother's recipe. They then added sauerkraut, vinegar, and pickles to their line of products. It was a moderately successful endeavor until a financial crisis hit. And this is the crisis that's called by history the Panic of 1873.
Love it.
But it's actually it was kind of like a massive depression that lasted 4 or 5 years.
Just a little blip.
In fact, this little depression was originally called the Great Depression in the United States.
I love it.
Until the truly great one happened in the 1920s. But we've talked about this before. This is sort of like in those post-Civil War years of like truly unfettered laissez-faire capitalism.
Sure.
There was like a fucking boom bust cycle that happened like all the time, you know? Anyway.
Glad we got all the kinks ironed out of that.
Yeah. And at least nobody's calling for us to return to that particular era.
Now we have to wait, 4 years or so, 4 to 7 years before, elderly need to eat cat food.
Yeah.
And ration their meds.
Interestingly, I didn't know this until I started looking into it for the show. The Panic of 1873 actually started in Austria-Hungary. It was because of financial problems that happened in Vienna, and then it sort of spiraled into the rest of Europe and then the rest of the world.
Love it.
Everything goes back to Austria-Hungary. Anyway, so in the aftermath of the so-called Panic of 1873, Heinz Noble and Company goes bankrupt in 1875. Heinz actually spent some time in a debtor's prison as a result of this, because of outstanding debts, I guess, related to the company. But, it couldn't have been that bad because a year later, Henry recoups some of his losses and he ditches his old partner and he goes into business with family with his brother John Heinz and a cousin Frederick Heinz, and they form the F&J Heinz Company in 1876. And so this is the company that now we know just as Heinz, but the official corporate biography still includes that earlier one as like the first start, right? And speaking of family and cousins, just an interesting note here from Wikipedia, quote, through his paternal grandmother, Charlotte Louisa Trump, he, Henry Heinz, was a second cousin of Friedrich Trump, second cousin once removed of real estate magnate Fred Trump, and second cousin twice removed of 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump.
Famous ketchup lover.
Yeah. Also
known ketchup lover.
Uses it in the White House.
Fuck.
Anyway, back to Heinz. So he starts again in 1876 with a slew of processed food products, like the horseradish, mentioned before, pickles, sauerkraut, a lot of like kind of German fare. And then he adds at this point the now famous Heinz tomato ketchup, which was first called catsup.
Sick.
And now, this might not be important to many, but I feel for my own sanity, I need to say this and make this clear. Everywhere when you look this up kind of casually or anything that's like related to the company, Henry Heinz is often credited as like inventing tomato ketchup or inventing ketchup in general, sort of like a trivia line. Just patently false, not true at all. Right. Ketchup has existed for a very long time and used to more generally refer to a much broader range of foods. Basically, just it's vegetable paste.
Right.
And I saw somewhere, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, the term ketchup first appeared in the English language and written down anyway in 1682. In both the UK and the US in the 17th, 18th centuries, ketchup was mostly made from mushrooms. That was the popular one, mushroom ketchup. And I implore you to look up a picture of mushroom ketchup, and I'm going to send you guys one quick. Here, let me send you this. So go ahead and take a look at that. Let me know if that looks appetizing.
That's a jar of poop.
Yeah, it's just foul, disgusting. So vegetable paste and ketchup was popular in the 19th century. Because it's basically a food preservative, right?
Sure,
it's not always necessarily, or historically wasn't always used as a condiment. It's a way to extend the shelf life of a vegetable or a food product.
Do you know that YouTuber named like Jay Townsend and Son? And he's like some sicko that spends his time in the woods and dressed in like 18th century garb and like making these sorts of like fucked up foods that there's a reason we don't eat them anymore. Like salted preserved pork that you have to like keep under a horse saddle for 6 months or something like that. And one of the things that he made was mushroom ketchup. which, I think he choked down for the purposes of YouTube monetization.
It looks real nasty, folks. You may or may not want to look up a picture of it yourself. But again, it became sort of popular as a general food product. Ketchup did in the 19th century, particularly in the U.S. because of its preservative quality. It could be like tinned or canned or jarred or something, and taken on long journeys. Recipes for tomato-based ketchups in the early 19th century often included anchovies. That was their big thing.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And according to this biography of Henry Heinz by Quentin R. Scraybeck, which I'm going to be reading from here and then in a couple of other places, Heinz didn't even necessarily anticipate tomato ketchup being the big seller. He also produced, when he restarted the company in 1876, walnut ketchup. And I want to quote from the book about the process for walnut ketchup here.
Yeah.
Quote, "Walnut catsup was the longer process in relation to tomato catsup. Vinegar was used to pickle walnuts in a Crocker barrel for 6 months or more. Many home recipes called for 12 months. This vinegar liquor was the base of the walnut catsup. Walnuts were then mashed with spices, horseradish, and anchovies, and added again to the base liquor. At this point, the walnut liquor was boiled with additions such as beer, wine, and some sweet spices. The Heinz recipe avoided the use of beer or wine." End quote. So,
Yum.
That sounds pretty fucking disgusting to me personally, but
I was like, I wonder what avenue what angle he's going for with this.
The book mentions that it kind of tasted like Worcestershire sauce.
I was just gonna say that because Worcestershire sauce has anchovies in it and that sort of stuff, right? It's just kind of, it's fermented in barrels, lay your parents' headquarters, and then we soak our feet in it for upwards of 6 to 10 hours.
It sort of mentions this, that I guess the reason why this was a popular product is because, again, it had a very long shelf life, sometimes like 20 years, possibly. And it was in particular demand from hotels. Hotels wanted walnut ketchup. They used it in a lot of stuff.
Sometimes you want to plan ahead. You want a meal plan, Shane.
Sure, yeah.
I guess you say, what do I want to be eating in 2042?
yeah, exactly.
You got to plan ahead.
And we'll talk about why maybe it had such a long shelf life a little bit later on. But anyway, getting back to the story. 1876, the new Heinz company starts producing this stuff. It sells very well. They set up a factory in Pittsburgh, and they're doing very well for themselves. Again, they're sort of in this, coming out of the year of the Depression, and they're starting to boom, and everything seems to be going up and up and up. That is for the very rich, of course. Because if you know maybe from your American labor history a little bit, after 1876 comes the great year of 1877, which a little event that is often under studied, is certainly under taught in like in your American high school history class. Which is called the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, or simply the Great Upheaval. And so, again, I think this is an event that is probably deliberately undertaught for a variety of reasons. We've talked about it a few times on the show. And Heinz wasn't necessarily like directly personally involved, but he did have a connection, and it's brought up in this biography that I mentioned. And the framing of it and the way it's brought up in the biography pissed me off so much that I have to read these couple of paragraphs about it here. So I'm going to jump into reading from the biography. Quote, "The Great Railroad Strike of the summer of 1877 would take place while Heinz was on a business trip to Washington. This deadly national strike had started in late July as the East Coast was caught in a major heat wave. The nation was still struggling with the panic of 1873, with unemployment high throughout the nation. The stagnation of the economy had squeezed profits on the nation's railroad companies. The Pennsylvania Railroad and Baltimore and Ohio Railroad had laid off thousands and asked the remaining brakemen and firemen to take a 10% pay cut while doubling up on the work. The wage cuts came with the news that the railroad companies were increasing dividends. Heinz had left Pittsburgh on July 14th, 1877, in the midst of rumors of a strike. The strike would start outside Baltimore at Camden Yards on July 16th. As Heinz arrived in Washington, the strike started in the Baltimore and Ohio yards. It moved quickly along the line to West Virginia and west. On July 19th, the Pennsylvania Railroad joined the strike, taking control of the Pittsburgh station and the switches. On the morning of July 20th, no trains were moving in Maryland, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, and Illinois. Heinz had left Washington on the 20th for Pittsburgh, but he got only as far as Baltimore, which was now engulfed in a riot. Heinz was stuck in Baltimore during the peak of riots there as gangs, socialists, and the unemployed joined the strikers.
Those sickos.
Yeah. Heinz would note the dozen deaths in Baltimore that day. On the 21st, Pittsburgh erupted in riots and the state militia arrived. Tracks were torn up and cars burned. The unemployed and street gangs joined in the riot. It keeps mentioning street gangs.
Yeah.
Shooting broke out on both sides. Very good people on both sides. By July 21st of 1877, 20 had been killed, including the sheriff, with hundreds of wounded lying on the sidewalks. Pittsburgh's Catholic Bishop Twigg walked the streets giving last rites to the wounded. Another 9 would die in the streets. The Union Station was torched and freight cars of products were looted as men, women, and children joined in, those dastardly street urchin children. In all, 1383 freight cars, 104 locomotives, and 66 passenger cars were destroyed at Pittsburgh. Damage came to over $5 million. Chicago also had significant riots and property damage. In many cities, the unemployed joined the strike and looting. A mob of over 20,000 terrorized Chicago. I mean, probably the rich of Chicago.
Yeah.
I would say. The riots traveled to the West Coast by July 24th. With the tracks torn up between Baltimore and Pittsburgh, Heinz did not get home until August 5th. It was a time of terror for both Heinz in Baltimore and his family in Pittsburgh. The country had never known such violence except in war and would never see such civil unrest again until the civil rights riots of the summer of 1967.
You know, what's wrong with these people? If they just went home and stayed calm, we'd all figure this out. But no, they have to go terrorize people, business owners, you know, just
Small
people that don't
owners.
deserve it.
Small, hardworking business owners.
That's right.
Americans had only read about such work-related violence in Europe in the 1870s, but the European immigrants of the 1840s could well remember the unrest and riots caused by socialists. Heinz had often listened to the stories of his German parents about the European riots in the 1840s.
Oh boy.
I guess they're talking about the spring of Europe. Anyway, labor historian Joseph Rayback described the effect. Quote, "The railway strike of 1877 thoroughly shocked a large portion of the public. Not since slaveholders had ceased to be haunted by dreams of a slave uprising had the propertied elements been so terrified."
What?
It was the perfect storm as the recession, heat wave, and strikers came together on July 21st, 22nd, and 23rd. It put business and family in perspective for Heinz. I want to just read one more paragraph here because it gets into why it's even being brought up in this biography of Heinz. Heinz feared for his factory in Pittsburgh, only a few blocks away from the violence. The telegraph lines were cut, and Heinz would not get in touch with his family for days. As he arrived in Pittsburgh, the destruction resembled the pictures of the Civil War. The newspaper and politicians would debate property rights, unionism, and capitalism for months. Heinz took a hard look at the issue and came to believe that people needed to be treated fairly in the workplace. Mm-hmm. Most capitalists of the day blamed the rise of unions and the influx of foreign ideas like socialism. Heinz saw it as a basic problem of fear of not being able to feed the family, something he had recently experienced. He also agreed with the German capitalists and most Germans that poor working conditions would lead to socialism. Heinz was also closer to the economic plight of the 1870s than most capitalists of the day. His travels took him to the heart of struggling cities, and his home was in the heart of Pittsburgh, not in the rich suburbs of the time. Heinz would be committed to paternal capitalism as a necessary element of business, end quote.
That's what I just need is a kind capitalist dad,
fatherly figure. Mm-hmm. So it's I'll skip over the rest of the details here, but the gist of it, and this is of course a very favorable biography of Heinz, and this is mentioned here as well as in other corporate histories on their website and stuff, and there's also like some stuff donated in his name in Pittsburgh or whatever, he sort of was able to launder later on, not him and his, obviously his descendants, sort of, this philanthropic image. And they talk about how, they would like offer certain kinds of services and stuff to their workforce.
Sure.
Again, the paternal capitalist.
And this is something that's mentioned in, like a lot of the articles that I've read that were written. Particularly, it's interesting because this is one thing that they seem to bring up a lot in articles or profiles of the Heinz family that were written around 2004 when John Kerry was running for president. They're really trying to like sort of cement this sort of like progressive or like sort of like out of step with his sort of liberalism or progressive ideals with like other fucking gilded age capitalists.
Yeah, exactly. I think this biography too is written 2008, 2009, so probably sort of commissioned around that same time, Chris. Which makes sense, which makes a lot of sense. But anyway, just to get back to the story here, skip over, again, some more of the other business details, but the point is that the Heinz company is very successful throughout the 1880s. It grows massively, expands into new plants. In 1888, Henry Heinz buys out his other two partners and renames the company H.J. Heinz Company, which is what the official name of the company still is known as, although now it's owned by the parent Kraft Heinz. And I think, Dwight, maybe you'll be talking about that merger later a little bit.
Yeah.
But okay, so you have more growth, more expansion. They start selling the products on an international scale. The 1880s and 1890s, mind you, are, Chris, as you mentioned, the sort of big boom of the Gilded Age, and Heinz is one of these beneficiaries of that at the time. An interesting side note also from this era, and I've seen this quoted in a number of different places and articles, so I have no reason to believe that this isn't true, and it's really funny because they like bring it up proudly on official like corporate documents, but in 1896 is when Henry Heinz comes up with the famous slogan 57 varieties. Right. And do you want to take a guess as to what the origin story of that is?
I mean, I would guess maybe they went through 57 iterations of the recipe or something, and the 57th was the better one.
Okay, Chris, you want to give a guess?
Well, I did. I mean,
you looked it. You looked it up. Oh, okay.
Articles,
so then I'll just get into it. So the story is that purportedly he was on a trip to New York City and he saw an ad for a shoe store that boasted 21 styles. And so he was struck by this ad and he wanted to do the same thing for his company. So he made up a number. Mm-hmm. He just straight up made up a number. And he picked it because 5 was his lucky number. And 7, he believed that, quote, imbued psychological influence of that figure and of its enduring significance to people of all ages.
What the fuck?
So he thought it was the 7 was like a hypnotic magic number. So he's like 57 varieties.
He was taken by a shoe store ad in like Manhattan.
Yeah.
And it was just 20. Oh my god!
Yeah, he just picked a number, sort of like in close, approximation of. I believe by that time they actually had like more products than that. They had like over 60 varieties of products or whatever. But they just sort of.
But he just made it up, and then later they would add stuff. There was like I think there was like a cookbook that came out in like the 20th century point. There was like 57 recipes or something like that.
Jello mold made with ketchup. Whatever they ate in the fucking 30s.
Which is really funny too, because like the only time I've ever really also thought about like the 57 varieties thing is the arbitrariness is from the original Manchurian Candidate. Have you guys seen that?
No, unsurprisingly.
Where it's the McCarthy stand-in character is trying to think of a concise number of communists in the State Department he come up with, and then he's hitting his ketchup bottle, and he hits upon the 57.
Would it really make it easier for you if we settled on just one number?
Yeah. Just one real simple number that'd be easy for me to remember. There are exactly 57 card-carrying members of the Communist Party in the Department of Defense at this time.
My God.
All right, so what else we got here? Skipping ahead a bit more, speaking of the Gilded Age stuff, this is just like a one of these like weird rich guy things, and I'll send you guys the picture for this right now. But I was recalled of a couple of the stories that we've talked about with Gilded Age sickos of like moving structures wholesale.
Oh yeah.
And so in 1904, he has his parents' house, which was in Sharpsburg, which remember that's like where he had started the business in his parents' basement or whatever. He has it like just moved downriver into Pittsburgh. And so
I'm
there's a
looking
picture
at
of it on the barge.
A house on the water.
Yeah, they had it lifted up. The things insane wealth will enable you to do. But the last thing I want to get into here is in 1906, because we have something pretty interesting going on here.
How do they steer it? I'm sorry. I'm not staring
You're
at
still
this.
looking at the barge?
I'm still looking
You're
at
steering
this.
the barge, not the house, Dwight.
Yeah.
He goes to like a contractor or something like that, or an architect, and was just like, yeah, all right, here's what I want to do. I got my folks' house, and where I want it is where it is now is just simply unsustainable, and where I want it to be is like 5 miles away, and they landed on river.
Yeah.
It's like good, great. No, that's wonderful. Good for them.
Again, back then you could just, plow. I'm surprised we haven't seen more of that in our contemporary Gilded Age. Just like Elon Musk, like moving, I don't know, like the fucking Taj Mahal or something on like some giant, evergreen, whatever shipping boat that then gets stuck in the Suez Canal again. But anyway, maybe that's things to come.
What's your parents' address?
As
The
H.G.
Allegheny
Wells
River.
might say. Yeah. But anyway, in 1906, we have something pretty interesting going on, which was Heinz' involvement with and support of and lobbying for the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, which passed and was then known by its acronym, PFDA, which was the beginning of what would eventually become the FDA that we all know and love.
Interesting.
And so, in addition to this time period being the Gilded Age, the early 20th century, late 19th in United States history, is sometimes also known as the Progressive Era, right? Because of this slew of reforms that were passed, that were basically all in response to the splendor and wretchedness of the Gilded Age capitalist system. And a big piece of this was food production, especially for the lower classes. And in short, industrial food production was disgusting. And in a lot of ways, it still is, but it was, even worse then. This was the year that Upton Sinclair's The Jungle came out, which documented the horrible lives of immigrant workers at the time. And again, a big piece of that being food production and consumption. And it was sort of in the air that something was going to give. There was a lot of public pressure, and it did. And eventually, with the passing of the PFDA, as well as the Meat Inspection Act, which were both passed in 1906. So how does Heinz figure into this? Well, if you recall, the whole point of ketchup is that it was a means to preserve foodstuffs. It had a long shelf life. So a lot of ketchups and other similar products at the time had tons of chemical preservatives and additives in them. That biography, I quoted from a bit, mentions that one of the early additives that Henry Heinz used was coal tar dye to give his ketchup that bright red color.
Did you say coal tar?
Yeah, coal tar
okay.
dye.
All right.
Yeah. Because if you've ever made ketchup, or if you, again, open up a can of tomato paste, say, and mix vinegar and all that other shit in it yourself, you'll notice it's kind of a dark red. It's a brown hue. Right. So to give it that bright red color, which is, a marketing thing, you add fucking, poisonous dyes to it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's synergy in Western Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
there's a lot of coal production.
Exactly.
And they've got this tar problem. Well, what do you do with that? Pennies on the dollar.
Some more gross stuff here from this book. So reading from it, quote, "The food industry lacked scientific guidance going into the 20th century. Copper sulfate, a known poison, was commonly used in pickles and other preserved vegetables to produce a bright green color. Benzoate of soda was a common preservative that could be poisonous in larger doses. Heinz himself had used things like benzoate and saccharin until they were found to be problematic." Your problematic faves. In early 1900s, Heinz moved to a no-benzoate ketchup, which increased his costs over his competition. More common in the food industry was substitutions such as wood pulp and horseradish, vegetable oil or cottonseed oil and olive oil, cane syrup and maple syrup, and ground stems and roots in many sauces. Heinz had always opposed filler, but saw it as an opportunity to take market share. The industry lacked chemists and biologists to even evaluate fillers in additions. For Heinz, the first decade of the new century was a corporate and personal struggle for national purity laws. Sorry, I had to include the national purity laws.
What's funny too is that we've talked about this early on in the show about the Kraft Parmesan grated cheese.
Oh yeah,
yes,
which contains wood pulp cellulose.
Yes.
They should release like Heinz classic, like original recipe. It still has like the fucking mercury and morphine and shit in it.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't have that same tang as it used to do when we put ambergris in it.
Yeah. We used to have lead in our ketchup. We used to be a proper country.
There's also a few mentions here with Heinz and a few other companies. They would have a problem with these kinds of preservatives, like I mentioned, that would cause like gaseous buildups in like barrels. Like barrels of food would like explode in the different factories and stuff. So not only was it dangerous to consume, it was like dangerous to work with. You know, you're basically turning your fucking ketchup barrels into like dynamite.
You can't overestimate the wonderful digestive properties of pitch.
Yeah. So besides all the nasty bits here, the headline is that in the early 1900s, this becomes more of a public issue, right? There's like more awareness about it. There's a few kind of like written campaigns. There's the stuff like The Jungle that eventually comes out. And that's when Heinz started swapping out some of these practices and getting rid of some of these kinds of nasty bits. And of course, we can see that as a net good, right? Like, obviously, that's like a good thing that they stopped putting the nasty shit into the food. But there was another angle, which is sort of alluded to here, which is that he started marketing his products as not containing artificial preservatives. And so this was a sort of a social issue turned advertisement in a sense, because like the social environment, the battlefield for these issues was the store, the place you would go get the food. And so that's where you'd buy the product. And so you'd have one product that said like, we don't contain artificial preservatives. And the implication is then all the other ones do, which of course they did. And the reason why Heinz knew that they did is because last year his did, right? But, it's a way to be like, we have the nice product, they have the nasty product, even though we used to carry the nasty product. We used to do the nasty thing. So the reason why I bring all this up is it provides an answer to this question that I was trying to grapple with because, Chris, sort of like you were mentioning, everywhere when you look up Heinz, it mentions, he was like ahead of his time, he was this progressive, and one of the things that's brought up a lot is his championing of like the PFDA and being like, we need to like make the food processes better. And then, there's like an immediate question that has, is like, why would a food industrialist champion and lobby for government regulation in his industry? I'm
having this question as well.
And so, that would surely hurt profits, right? Is it purely because he's just benevolent and he thinks, the food has to be good? Maybe to a certain extent, but it's also a way to make your competitors illegal. It's
Jesus
a way,
Christ.
Which is not entirely what ended up happening because other food companies did adjust eventually to these regulations, but it gives Heinz a real edge in the market, right? Again, both in terms of the advertising, but then when a lot of this stuff gets implemented, Heinz is already doing a lot of this stuff. So for a while, they get a larger slice of the market. They, get closer to a monopoly, which is, again, I would argue probably why it's Heinz ketchup is the dominant ketchup. There isn't really a lot of other ones. And it also makes you extremely friendly with the government, right? Mm-hmm. Which has its own benefits. And so speaking of which, when the First World War broke out, Henry Heinz ended up working for the government's food administration from 1917 onward. And I'm skipping over a lot of years and detail because we're running up on time, but a few last takeaways before I hand it over. So Henry Heinz dies in 1919 at the age of 74. His son, Howard Covode Heinz, takes over the business. And then his son's son, Henry John Heinz II, takes over when Howard died. They were all rich sickos. They oversaw further expansion and growth of the company, not to mention lucrative wartime contracts with the government, especially during the Second World War. Henry John Heinz II, who's the grandson of Henry Heinz, also had a son that he names after himself, so Henry John Heinz III, who in his own right becomes a Republican congressman in 1971, then a senator in 1977. And that's the American dream, right? Like, with enough money and enough tomatoes, any capitalist son can become a legislator. And Henry Heinz III did die dramatically in a helicopter plane crash in 1991. Where and Chris, I don't know if you're gonna talk about it at all.
I do, yeah, I do have some details of that.
Okay, all right, because it's a really weird one.
It's strange, yeah,
but it leaves behind, his kids, but as well as his widow, Teresa Heinz, which is sort of in our modern era. So at this point, I'll hand it over to you, Chris.
All right. So yes, I am going to talk mostly about Teresa Heinz. I do have this is completely off topic, but Dwight, I need you to indulge me real quick, please, in something.
Yeah, hit me with it, man.
I'm sending something into the Discord. I'm still on the email list for like the Trump campaign, and they send out some really funny emails sometimes, like soliciting donations. In fact, they sent one out like a week ago that had like a fake, like the subject line of the email was like order confirmation 45 20 24 or something. So
yes.
They're like, trying to convince you that you had like some kind of order confirmation. But I just got this one, and Dwight, I need you, just for me, I need you to just read this in the Trump voice for us.
It would be an honor.
Thank you so much.
It would really be an
I'm putting
honor.
it in the Discord now.
All right, so this is Donald J. Trump, right? Many people are asking, and yes, it's true. It's true. While playing a round of golf with some of the greatest golfers in our country, I made a hole in one. I made a hole in one, folks. I love it. It says, breaking President Trump scores a hole in one. Oh, my God. It was on the 7th hole, playing 181 yards into a slight wind. I hit a 5-iron, which sailed magnificently into a relatively strong wind with approximately 5 feet of cut, after which it bounced twice and then went clank into the hole. Who does this? This could not come at a better time, friend. I just released one of our favorite photos of me golfing, and I want you to have it. I even signed it for you, and I hope that you enjoy it. That was my creative.
That was your own editorial. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I do appreciate that. And then it goes on to, ask for donations.
An insane thing to write. And it probably happened, too.
Sure, yeah.
It probably happened, too. Because, I know he had, famously cheated, for decades.
Oh, yeah.
On the golf course.
Yeah, that's right.
He was just, just fucking Goldfinger. James Bond. Anyway, yeah, love it. So happy to do that anytime, really.
Okay. Anyway, back to
24-hour on call.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's good to know that I have you available for that.
Yeah, anytime.
So anyway, back to the Heinz family here. So we left off at John Heinz, who became a senator. His father, Jack Heinz, was the interestingly, he went to Yale. He was a member of the Skull and Bones Society, of course. But I believe he was the last one to last member of the family to actually have a hand in managing the Heinz company. I believe when he stepped down in the 60s, somebody from outside the family took over as CEO, and since then the family hasn't really had a managing stake in the day-to-day operations of the business. But John Heinz, he did work for the company for a few years, I guess initially out of college, for about 5 years. I guess decided it wasn't for him. He, went on to become a professor of business at Carnegie Mellon for a little bit, and then in 1971 won a seat in the House of Representatives in Pennsylvania's 18th congressional district after the incumbent representative died in office. He served a couple terms in the House, and then in 1976 he was elected to the Senate. He was reelected in I guess 82 and 88, and then later died, which is really the most significantly, I guess, for our story here. He died in a plane crash and also married, who we now know as Teresa Heinz Carrie. But the helicopter crash, and it's interesting because I maybe you, Shane, had the same kind of experience I did, where I knew that this was something that had happened. I did not know the details of how exactly this happened, and I did want to kind of go over that very briefly here. But basically, what happened is he was John Heinz. He was as a senator at this time. He was flying in a flying in a small plane. He was the only passenger. There was the pilot and the co-pilot, and they were trying to land in Philadelphia. And the pilot noticed that the indicator that tells you if the nose landing gear, like the front landing gear, is extended and locked. It wasn't illuminated, so he wasn't able to know for sure if that was down and locked, so that he could make a safe landing. And so he executed a low pass over the tower, so the workers there could try to see, which is apparently what you're supposed to do in this kind of situation. So that the workers on the ground in the tower could visually check and inspect and see if they could see that the landing gear was down, which they all agreed that it was. And I'm not exactly sure how they were enlisted to help, but a helicopter belonging to the Sun Oil Company who just happened to be passing by, on the way to the company's headquarters, and they attempted to help. And what they attempted to do was to get close enough to the plane in the air so that they could visually check and see if the landing gear was down and locked.
Always a good move.
That seems odd to me. Seems like compounding problems.
Yeah, can't possibly predict how that could go badly. But in trying to get close enough to the plane to do that, they fucking clipped the plane with the rotor of the helicopter, and caused both of the everybody on board, both of them died, and they spun out.
Jesus Christ!
Actually, this happened over in elementary school as well. There were 2 children on the ground that were also killed.
What the fuck?
In the crash? Yeah. And the National Transportation Safety Board's findings concluded that the crash was caused by, quote, appallingly poor judgment on both flight crews of the pilot of the plane, and also the helicopter crew for attempting to do what they did. Most significantly, they determined that it would have been impossible for them to be able to see into the nose wheel of that particular type of plane from a helicopter. So it was pointless to even do what they attempted to do, because they never would have been able to successfully do what they were trying to do, to see that the gear was down and locked.
This knowing not much more about this, it's also I feel like a lot of poor judgment weirdly crowds around some of the most resourced people. You know what I'm saying? Because It's just well, of course we can do that. We're invincible. We can do anything. And then the common safeguards, or even just things like common sense, maybe we shouldn't fly aircraft next to each other, which I think is pretty well established as a rule in general. And things like these happen. I mean, wow.
Right. Wow is right. So that's our
and the children. That's so fucked up.
Yeah, that's the really tragic. Of course, it's all tragic, but that's really the kind of most tragic part of the whole situation. Yes. So that is our sort of the major contribution that John Heinz makes to our story here. The other one, of course, is marrying, who we would come to know as Teresa Heinz, Carrie, in 1966. And about Teresa, so, and a lot of this information about her specifically, and some of the other sort of details of the family I'm going to get into, is from this 2004 LA Times article called "Family Has Seen Share of Turmoil" by a guy named Ralph Vardabedian. And so Teresa Heinz, Carrie, she was born Teresa Thierstein, or Tierstein. I'm not exactly sure how to if I'm saying that correctly, but she was born in what's today the nation of Mozambique, but what was then a colony of Portugal. Mm-hmm. And she likes to say that she was born under a dictatorship, which she was. And she mentions it. It's mentioned twice, in her DNC. Because she spoke at the 2004 DNC when John Kerry was running for president, and
I remember it.
She mentions this, she says this directly, but it's also said in this introductory video for her that was played before her speech. But she likes to say that she was born under a dictatorship, which is true. She's talking about Antonio Salazar of Portugal, who was a fascist. His government was modeled on Mussolini's. He didn't call himself a fascist. He was critical of Nazi Germany, but his criticism of Nazi Germany was of its pagan elements, which is a very particularly specific thing to pick out as your criticism of Nazi Germany. And here's a quote from him in the late 1930s, kind of on this subject. Like what he was opposed to, I guess, was what he saw as the sort of like irreligion of like the Nazi government. And here's a quote from him here: "We are opposed to all forms of internationalism, communism, socialism, syndicalism, and everything that may divide or minimize or break up the family. We are against class warfare, irreligion, and disloyalty to one's country, against serfdom, a materialistic conception of life, and might over right."
Interesting hodgepodge of stuff there.
Right. And he was a long, sort of long ruling leader in Portugal there. But so it is correct. It's correct for her to say that she grew up under a dictatorship. But the context there and sort of that is left out in saying that is she grew up in a colony of that dictatorship, and she grew up, as a member of a wealthy, upwardly mobile settler family, right, within that colony, right? Like her family was not indigenous to Mozambique; they were Portuguese. Her father was a doctor, an oncologist, and a tropical disease specialist. On her mother's side, I believe there's wealth there as well. She has some ancestor, great grandfather, I believe, on her mother's side, who was like a merchant and ship owner, like in the 1800s. So there was wealth, long-standing wealth on both sides of the family. So, to say that she grew up under a dictatorship is sort of kind of not giving the full story, right? I'm sure she did not suffer the way some people may have. And one of the things that's actually said, like in that introductory video from the 2004 DNC, like I was saying, is that one of the people that's interviewed is what she says about Teresa's childhood. She says she was exposed as a child to people who really had nothing. Not that she came from nothing or anything like that, but that she was exposed to people who had nothing, which you may be if you're a European colonist living in Africa. And it may very well be true that like her family may have been opposed to that dictatorship. I don't know. I haven't seen that said, but regardless, obviously she would have had a very different life than members of the local population. But so she takes control of the family empire after John Heinz dies in 1991 in the plane crash. At the time this article was written in 2004, her net worth was estimated at $1 billion. I believe the recent estimates that I've seen have that down to $750 million. But she controls the lion's share of the family wealth, right? But this is a very sort of widespread family with many different branches, many of whom don't know each other, or really don't, for one reason or another, don't really want anything to do with the Heinz family name or to be associated with the Heinz family for whatever reason. There were some falling out, which I'll kind of get into, that took place among the different branches of the family. But she's the one, these days, she's the most public face, of this family. She's obviously kept the Heinz name, and she's, according to the person who wrote this article, she's pretty sort of private about discussing like the family or the history of the family. Like she declined to be interviewed for this article about the family. She apparently in the mid 90s commissioned, hired an archivist to trace the Heinz family tree, but has, at least as of the publishing of this article, has always kept that information private. But like I said, nobody in the Heinz family works for the company anymore. They own a very small stake in the company's stocks. There's some people, various widows and people been in various branches of the family that still have large amounts of wealth. One person who'd married into the family, not Teresa Heinz. I'm kind of drawing a blank on this woman's name, but even decades after the husband, her husband's death or whatever like that, still kind of has this trust fund in excess of $30 million as of 2004 that was used for sort of like scholarships and stuff like that. So there's vast amounts of money in like different sections of this family that have still kind of been passed down generationally. But after H.J. Heinz died in 1919, some of his descendants began migrating to California. Heinz family, the Heinz name very tied to Pennsylvania, very tied particularly to Pittsburgh. But after the death of the founder, some of the descendants began migrating to California, and eventually this like western branch of the family outnumbered the Pennsylvania branch. And then in 1935, Clifford Heinz dies, and this was sort of the beginning of this sort of larger schism between these two branches of the family. Clifford Heinz was a son, a direct son of H.J. Heinz, of the founder. He was the second oldest brother, and he sort of felt overshadowed by Howard, by his older brother's more influential role in the company, and then especially by the 1930s when Howard's son Jack was also playing a more prominent role in the country in the company that he had been. Clifford was one of the ones who had moved to California and died of pneumonia 3 months after arriving there in 1935. And at the time, he was married to his third wife, Vera, and his adult children from his second marriage, I guess, were not kept in the loop, and they were not informed of his illness until after he was already dead. And
see, that's the closeness that you can
that's
really
the bond
come to
of family.
With
Yeah, that's the bond of family that you really need money to kind of bring out in people. But apparently there was this sort of kind of beef between the family and their mother, Clifford's second wife, I believe, his ex-wife, had sort of like run afoul of the Pittsburgh branch of the family. And after Clifford's death, they found that they had been cut out of the will as well. And they'd, always blamed that decision on the sort of like the Pennsylvania branch of the family, sort of like, taking advantage of him on his deathbed and sort of making that happen, right? When he was incapacitated, that was always their suspicion. And this turned into a decades-long lawsuit, which ultimately did end up with them getting a payout, like getting a large share of various Heinz trust funds. So there seems to be this sort of repeating theme of like, people who marry into the family sort of being treated with suspicion or sort of not seeming to be treated fully like as members of the family. There are other stories like this of people just getting cut out or just sort of getting sort of ignored or not given the respect or whatever of the of the branch of the family that's in Pennsylvania. Even when John Heinz was going to be marrying Teresa, they didn't, their parents didn't trust her, right? They thought that he'd been, I believe that the line from the article was that his father, Jack Heinz, thought that John had been hoodwinked by this fortune-seeking European woman, is I believe the term that's used.
Great line.
Is used
Great
in
line.
the article there. But one of Clifford's sons, Clifford Heinz Jr., who he just died a few years back, and he was in his 90s. But he was he went on to become a major conservative donor. He lived in Orange County, California, which is just classic rich Republican place to live. But he funded a think tank called the Free Congress Foundation, which had underwritten the campaigns of various Republican politicians, including Dana Rohrabacher of California. Even better than that, he was also a key financial supporter of Oliver North's 1994 unsuccessful Senate campaign.
Very good.
Contributing $25,000 to that. Another interesting bit here about Clifford Heinz Jr. that's from this LA Times article is says when the Dalai Lama won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1989, he was awakened with that news at Clifford's mansion in Newport Beach, where he was a guest at the time. And a little more about the kind of like sort of backstabbing and sort of family drama here. I'm going to read this next bit sort of directly from the LA Times article here.
Wait, are you going to mention Clifford again at all?
What do you got?
Oh, no, I was just going to say Clifford the Big Red Tomato.
Hell yeah.
I'm sorry.
Got him.
Continue.
Got his ass.
Roasted. Boom.
Roasted tomatoes. Hey.
But another little bit of drama, sort of inter-family drama, was another family member named Rust Heinz, one of the grandsons of the founder H.J. Heinz. He moved to Pasadena in the 1930s and married this woman named Helen Clay Goodloe, who was came from another wealthy, prominent family, a daughter of a prominent family from Kentucky, that had included a U.S. senator and an ambassador, as well, also coming from another prominent family there. But Rust Heinz was killed in a car accident in 1939, and as the story goes, family attorneys pressured his wife into taking a $25,000 to just take $25,000 and forfeit any other claim to any of the other family money.
Wow.
The couple had already, they were separated at the time, but they were still legally married.
$25,000 in $1939.
$1939.
That's
a sizable sum of money, but considerably less than than she may have been, technically entitled to as his wife. And she went on to married again, had another had like a second, as it's described, a second unhappy marriage, and then went on to later commit suicide. Her daughter sort of kind of blames that on the Heinz family. The quote directly from her daughter here. She was so young. I'm not bitter, but what the Heinz family did to my mother will come around.
That sounds bitter to me.
That sounds bitter. That sounds that sounds pretty bitter. Another little anecdote here. Irene Heinz, the eldest child of the company founder of H.J. Heinz, she married and moved to Manhattan, and this branch of the family has sort of completely disappeared from the public view. Right? They sort of kind of took their money and left, and didn't really have anything to do with the rest of the family or the company or anything like that. Her husband, according, again, to this side of the family, her husband suffered a nervous breakdown as a result of the harsh treatment of the Heinz family, according to their granddaughter. But their daughter is one of the ones that was interviewed in this article, and is basically saying that they distrust the company money. It's destroyed personal character. It's destroyed members of the family. When people become estranged from this family, or we'll get cut out. We'll get cut out, and we'll get sort of strong armed out of their share of the money or their share of the inheritance. Her younger brother John became estranged from the family. It says here he was also known for eccentric behavior. This is kind of an interesting anecdote here. New York City police arrested him in 1948 on allegations that he beat a man with his cane. When police examined the cane, they found a 28-inch dagger in its shaft.
What the fuck?
4 years later, after he fired a pistol at a neighbor's birthday party, he was ordered by a New Jersey magistrate to leave the town. John, this guy, he never married, suffered from alcoholism, and died in 1957. And in his will, he instructed his executives to just sort of give the money that he had away. He had $4.5 million. It was just sort of all sort of blindly. They found charities for it and just sort of gave it away. So that's sort of the interesting story of this kind of the breakdown of this family over the 20th century, as it kind of branches out, and those branches sort of become separate from each other and sort of opposed to each other, I guess, in some sense. But like I mentioned, the bulk of the family fortune is belongs to Teresa Heinz, and also now by extension of that to John Kerry, who is
so funny.
One of the I'm not sure exactly of his ranking, must be one of the richest members of Congress. He was certainly one of the richest members of the Obama administration. And during, as part of his various roles in the Obama administration, or his role was in the Obama administration, rather, as Secretary of State, and then later his role in the Biden White House, he has had to disclose and divest from potential conflicts of interests, and it's sort of that has sort of given us a little bit of a window into some of the assets and some of the wealth that Teresa Heinz and John Kerry have. And we read a little bit from this here. Here's a statement that John Kerry released. I am committed to the highest standards of ethical conduct for government officials. I will not participate personally and substantially in any particular matter that has a direct and predictable effect on my financial interests or those of any person whose interests are imputed to me unless I first obtain a written waiver. And with that, he announced 100 separate investments that he would divest from should he become Secretary of State. They included stake in Cenovus Energy Incorporated, a Canadian company that would have benefited from the proposed at the time Keystone XL pipeline.
To be clear, in his capacity as the Biden administration, he is the climate czar.
Yes, yes. And this is one of the main things he ran on as well in 2004. What's interesting, again, as part of this, I watched and I might play a clip or two, but I watched Teresa's full speech from the 2004 DNC, and I watched some of John Kerry's speech from the 2004 DNC, which just the line, his opening line, has just stuck with me. Where he comes up to and maybe we can play it now.
Please, yeah.
Where he comes up to the microphone and says, "I'm John Kerry, and I'm reporting for duty," and then salutes, and then like all the Democrats give him like a fucking 20-second long standing ovation.
I'm John Kerry, and I'm reporting for duty.
But then immediately after that, he goes.
Cringe.
He goes on to say something like, we're all here today because we all agree on one thing, that America needs to be strengthened at home. And it's interesting to kind of see the way and sort of the role they were trying to fill in 2004, which was to sort of out Republican or out patriot the Republican Party, which is I'm glad that they learned from that and have never attempted to do that again.
And again too, if you were paying any bit of attention to any sort of class analysis and how politics is run in this country, one of the most on the nose sort of examples of how much we are controlled by those with moneyed interests and shit, because this was an election between two members of the same elite Ivy League fraternity, secret society. Come on.
Well, and also the fact that they so much of what Kerry ran on as well was being a troop, was the place of criticism that a lot of the critique of Bush came from at that time was the difference that John Kerry wanted to strike between him and Bush was that he'd actually served his country, he'd actually gone to war.
And they fucking roasted him.
Yeah, the Swift-boating
tore him the fuck apart.
Yeah,
deftly and totally.
But I mentioned that because the climate thing. He was talking about that, and so was Teresa in her speech back in 2004. That was the other sort of plank of the platform. The first being, we're going to out Republican the Republicans, and the second being, well, we also care about the climate. As you can see from their holdings in these various energy companies. Some of their other investments that they had to divest from was a stake in Raytheon, also ExxonMobil, Pfizer, Qualcomm, AT&T, American Express, Microsoft, and a number of private equity firms. Speaking of private equity firms, a little bit of an aside here. Teresa's son, Christopher Heinz, from her marriage, not with John Kerry, but from her marriage to John Heinz, Christopher Heinz, founded a private equity firm in 2009 called Rosemont Seneca Partners. He founded that with Hunter Biden and a guy named Devin Archer. Devin Archer, by the way, went on to be convicted of fraud for defrauding a branch of the Sioux Indian tribe out of bond sale proceeds. And this was in his capacity with this company, with Rosemont Seneca, that Christopher Heinz and Hunter Biden founded with him, and they did sort of the move like we discussed recently on the Carlyle Group episode, where like rather than locate their headquarters in Manhattan, where where you would expect most American private equity firms to be headquartered, they headquartered it in Washington, D.C. I wonder why that might be.
Yep.
But Chris Heinz ended up ending his business relationship with the firm in 2014 after Hunter Biden and Devin Archer both joined the board of Burisma, the Ukrainian energy company. And
this shit doesn't stop.
Heinz had, interestingly, he had opposed them joining the board due to the reputational risk that it might cause. And like I said, Devin Archer would go on in 2018 to be convicted of securities fraud and conspiracy charges for defrauding a Native American tribe of all of all groups to defraud. But a little bit more about some of the Kerry Heinz divestments. Again, this is going to be some more of his financial ties that he had to disclose as part of him more recently, just last year, becoming presidential envoy for climate in the Biden administration. He is one of the, like I said, was one of the richest members of Congress. Was certainly one of the richest members of the Obama administration. He's as part of this set of disclosures, he's disclosed millions of dollars in income, $5 million that he had got from Bank of America, where he'd served as chairman of the bank's Global Advisory Council immediately after his tenure as Secretary of State ended in the Obama administration. So he basically just went right from Obama to Bank of America and then to Biden later on.
I didn't know that. I didn't know he went to Bank of America.
Yeah, he received $125,000 in consulting fees from the Rise Fund, an investment firm with a renewable energy portfolio. He has taken in more than $380,000 in speaking fees from various entities. He's from waste management to Cornell University are the two examples that they use here for places that had paid him to speak, and liquidated up to $15 million in various stock holdings prior to this disclosure. And this kind of stuff is always interesting because it does give us a sort of window into what exactly their holdings are and what exactly their stake in various companies are. And then I just sort of had one last thing I kind of wanted to play here before I handed it over to you, and it's just a clip that I liked, especially considering the what we heard about the kind patriarchal nature of H.J. Heinz earlier in the episode. Can I get screen sharing, please?
You should be able to, yeah.
Okay, just a brief clip, and this is what I was talking about earlier. This is a clip from the sort of introductory video that was played at the 2004 DNC before Teresa Heinz's speech, and this is a little clip. I believe this is Christopher Heinz of Rosemont Seneca. I believe this is just a brief clip of him here that I really enjoyed and wanted to share with you guys.
John has been rather remarkable. I think the effect he's had on the American people is similar to the effect he's had on me as a stepfather, which is to say, he showed up in my life, found him likable enough, but didn't know much about him. And next thing you know, I found myself appreciating more and more the depth of his character and of his soul.
I'm John Kerry, and I'm going to be your dad. This is what we need for America. We needed a kind, patriarchal dad who would be America's dad.
They really played up that angle too with him. I remember this is from literally almost 20 years ago. But his daughter's speech, and I remember a phrase of hers stuck out in my mind, which she was like, and I look up to his sad puppy dog eyes or something like that. And I was just like, he looks like fucking Herman Munster.
There was a really, it's really stuck with me. There was I remember a particular Onion headline from 2004. It was Horseface narrows horse race.
No, that's good. That's like a
really
New York Post headline.
Yeah. It is.
The real star, however, as we all remember, of the 2004 DNC was Barack Obama, who gave the keynote speech. That DNC didn't give it didn't get Kerry elected, but it probably got Obama elected 4 years later.
You know what? I just thinking back to 2004. I think the first way as a young man, because I was 13, 14 years old, that I became aware of his relationship to Heinz. Besides it maybe being brought up a few times, like in just like during the race, but a Jib Jab.
Yes.
You guys remember Jib
Yes.
Jab?
Jesus
Do you remember?
Christ,
Do you remember
Shane.
that one from 2004?
I just posted it like 2 months ago. I love it.
I can't remember what the line was, but there's like a moment in that little flash cartoon where he has like a bottle of Heinz or something and he's drinking from it, and I was like,
that's classic political humor there. Maybe that can be our outro.
There you go.
Our outro music.
Yeah, absolutely should be. Absolutely. That's vintage, man. I mean, that was the old internet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So since this is going a little long, we decided we wanted to put this into a two-parter. So we're going to continue next week with part 2 on our episode on Heinz. Stay cool.
This land is your land. This land is my land. I'm a Texas tiger. You're a liberal wiener. I'm a great crusader. You're a Herman Munster. This land will surely vote for me.
This land is your land, this land is my land. I'm an intellectual, you're a stupid dumbass. I'm a Purple Heart winner, and yes, it's true, I won it thrice. This land will surely vote for me.
You have more waffles than a house of pancakes. You offer flip-flops, I offer tax breaks. You're a UN pussy, and yes, it's true that I kick ass. Ah! This land will surely vote for me.
You can't say nuclear, that really scares me. Sometimes a brain can come in quite handy, but it's not gonna help you, because I won 3 Purple Hearts. This land will surely vote for me.
You're a liberal sissy.
You're a right-wing nut job.
You're a pinko commie.
You're dumb as a doorknob.
Hey, you got that Botox.
But I still won 3 Purple Hearts. This land will surely vote for me.
This land was my land,
but now it's our land.
From California to the New York Island. What I do?
From the liberal wieners
to the right-wing nut jobs.
This land belongs.
This land belongs.
This land belongs to you and me.
Yeah. Oh, and Dick Cheney too.